From the wait for an interim report on health contract investigations to a deep dive on the doctor shortage and the deal facing Alberta teachers. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, former NDP MLA and Cabinet Minister Marg McCuaig-Boyd. And Rob Breakenridge is a broadcaster, columnist, and host of the Line Alberta podcast. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with the latest delay of an interim report looking into health service contracts. Back in May, the Smith government gave former Manitoba Chief Judge Raymond Wyand a 4-month extension on the third-party investigation he's leading into allegations of high-level conflict of interest and interference tied to health care contracts. An interim report was expected Wednesday, but according to the government, more time needed to conduct interviews before an interim report can be submitted. A final report, though, still expected on October 15th. Marg, what do you feel this latest missed deadline says about the government's expectations of this third-party investigation, which was initially announced back in March?
Well, it's probably not unusual to extend a report, but I would guess that it's for a couple of reasons. Either the problem was way bigger than they anticipated, or you know, I did see that he's still waiting to interview people, and maybe the system, the process is being frustrated by the government. Both aren't good, good news. So I see that they, you know, we're talking about the interim. She hasn't seen anything about it. I find that odd as well.
Rob, back in March, the Justice Minister said during question period that the interim report would be posted online for all Albertans to see on its initial May due date. However, a statement issued by the government on Wednesday says that's not the case, citing no requirement to do so in the terms that were set out. Where does that leave dialogue around this investigation?
Well, it's interesting. And I think in a way this whole exercise was kind of about getting this scandal off the front page and sort of allowing it to settle in the background for a while. So it was really more about buying time for the government. I mean, it obviously wasn't going to go away, and there's the very real potential that this report could reopen this whole controversy, maybe introduce some new angles or elements that we hadn't known before. I mean, it was an interesting coincidence. The Globe and Mail had a story this week on some potential other conflicts of interest in all of this, just as we're learning about these delays. So that was a combination, I think, of some awkward headlines for the government. And yeah, to be backing away from at least allowing us to see the interim report, it does convey a sense that maybe the government's worried about what might be there. But ultimately, this report will be made public. It sounds like maybe it's going to be few more weeks, perhaps. I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens in the end here. But yes, I think the government's bracing for what might be found here. And as Marg alluded to, I mean, there's the potential that either there's a lot more here or that there have been other things that have kind of stymied this investigation and neither really bode well, I think, for the government here.
Well, Marg, the final report still apparently scheduled to be completed by October 15th. That is less than 2 weeks ahead of MLAs returning to their seats in the legislature. What kind of weight do you feel there will be for Albertans to actually see details of the outcome? And is that a discussion that should factor into the fall sitting?
I think there'll be huge pressure to see the final report. And as Rob said, they were wanting to maybe take the heat off the issue. But I think by not talking about the interim report, they're just bringing more attention to it. And I think it absolutely will be the subject of question period and all the different newsers that'll go on and pressers. And yeah, I think it's going to do the opposite. And they're going to have to be prepared.
Rob, with this missed deadline, the opposition has renewed its demands for a public inquiry. What will it take for the outcome of the Wyand investigation to put those calls to rest?
Well, yeah, it's certainly possible that we may get some revelations in this report that might put some added pressure on the government to hold a public inquiry. And I think one of the criticisms at the time was that this investigation was ultimately going to be somewhat limited in its scope anyway, that a public inquiry could get to areas that this investigation perhaps couldn't. So I'll be curious to see whether it adds a little bit more ammunition to these calls for a public inquiry. Clearly, that was something the government was resisting, in part because of the potential revelations and even just the idea that, rising it to that level really, I think, suggests in the minds of the public that there's a scandal here. And I think clearly the government doesn't want that perception being out there. But, may get to a situation where they don't have any other choice. It's not just the opposition. Obviously, it was one of the factors that led to this rupture in the UCP with Peter Guthrie and Scott Sinclair ending up on the outside of the UCP because, they wanted to see some action on this front, especially Peter Guthrie, who had been in cabinet, and it was clearly quite alarmed by what he had been seeing and hearing. So this could actually end up ramping up the pressure on inquiry, even if this was meant to be sort of instead of a public inquiry originally.
All right. Next up for us, we heard from University of Calgary professor Dr. Braden Mans off the top this evening, the lead investigator into a study that analyzed data over a 16-year span to get a picture of what's driving Alberta's doctor shortage, found physicians being stretched thin by the demands of an aging population and increasingly complex medical conditions. Rob, what do you make of the picture the study paints of what's helping drive the doctor shortage and the direction it could give the government through whatever remains of health system overhaul?
Yeah, a few things here. Clearly this isn't an Alberta-specific problem, and other provinces and jurisdictions are dealing with these same kinds of pressures. And here in Alberta, I think, the government can at least point to some of the elements in this report, like having a focus on primary care centers and trying to incorporate that into the system. And the government can say, we're doing that. We're trying to do that. We're trying to attract physicians here, keep physicians here. When you go back a little bit further, and I know it's kind of similar to the conversation we'll be having about teachers, it's just the whole nature of the relationship between the Alberta government and doctors, where for a period it was quite adversarial to the point where even that was driving doctors out of the province, not to mention all the other pressures in the system. So it's not an easy problem to solve. There was a story this week about town of Millet, just south of Edmonton. It had been 20 years since they'd had a doctor in town. One finally set up shop there and pulled the plug after 6 months and is leaving town. So it's not an easy problem to fix, but I think it highlights that, look, if the government's serious, there's maybe a path here that can start to address these challenges.
And Marg, Dr. Mans told us at the end of the conversation that the researchers did present their findings to the government. What do you make of the roadmap they're offering for improvements, and how could or should that weigh on the government as it moves forward?
Well, I would hope they'd look at the report and listen. Some of the things he suggests, I think, will go really well in rural Alberta, which was always my focus when I was in government, being a rural MLA. I think the primary care centers are the key. One of the things I like that the government's done is they're doing financing, education for doctors in rural Alberta at the Grand Prairie, what used to be Grand Prairie Regional College. They could do the same maybe for nurse practitioners and the support system that, we need for these primary care centers, because what we have now isn't working. So we have to look at a new way to do things.
All right, time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, setting the stage for teachers voting on a tentative deal. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. Alberta teachers are set to vote this weekend on a newly reached tentative contract, potentially ending a labor dispute that has become quite public.
The public has been firmly on the side of teachers in this particular case. I think it's because they're seeing their class sizes. They're seeing the situation in their kids' classroom. They're seeing how stressed the teachers are, right? And so they can connect with that and they can understand that.
While the Teachers Association and the government are not sharing many details of the tentative agreement, a copy obtained by the Canadian Press shows the deal varies little from the government's standing offer, including the same salary increase of 12% over 4 years and the hiring of 3,000 more teachers over 3 years. One change, though, the province covering COVID-19 vaccines for teachers, while most Albertans will, of course, have to pay out of pocket for that this year. If the deal is not ratified, teachers are set to go on strike October 6th. Marg, you have an extensive background in education prior to your time as a politician in government. You're reminding me in the break that you were a teacher yourself for what, 3 decades or so, right? So on the tentative deal itself, surprised to see it come as quickly as it did, given the two sides only returned to the bargaining table last Friday.
I was surprised. but it was kind of silent for a bit, and I was hoping they were at the table working. But I haven't seen the deal, obviously. But looking at my social media friends talking about it, it doesn't sound like it's changed significantly. And if I was to poll those folks, it doesn't sound like it's going to get passed. But I mean, that's a very small sample of people that are commenting on it.
Rob, what's your read on the assessment that the public, we heard that clip there a moment ago from the labor expert, the public is firmly on the side of teachers, and whether or not that's a driving factor behind the two sides landing at a tentative agreement?
Yeah, I think it is. And that's one of the big factors in a situation like this, because of just what an enormous impact a teacher strike or even a lockout has. So I think maybe the Alberta government sees an opportunity here now where they presented an offer and they can reinforce that in every public comment on this situation. And so now the ball's in the teachers' court here. And I think it's a real dilemma for teachers because you get a sense that maybe they're not crazy about this deal, but what happens if you say no? Are you going to get a better offer? And what's it going to take to get that? And in the meantime, if the headline is, teachers reject deal, go on strike, does that change the dynamic of how the public views this whole situation? And does some of that blame start to shift toward the teachers? So, yeah, there's a lot going on here. And again, as we talk about the way things were previously with the Alberta government, maybe being a little adversarial with doctors, that's been a real issue here with teachers. And, with the whole book ban controversy and this whole issue around gender pronouns and names, right? This whole position that the government has taken, parents can't trust teachers. We need to step in and make sure that the parents are being treated fairly. And it just speaks to the whole climate, the whole atmosphere between the government and teachers right now.
Well, and Marg, from the position of teachers, if it is that the deal is similar to what they already rejected back in May, where do you feel that then leaves the ratification vote this weekend? How much optimism should there be around it?
I don't know. Rob brings up very good points about the relationship that has not been very positive in the last while. Teachers are really mad, and I think they're at the point that enough is enough. And it's important to remember they're not going to get strike pay over this strike, but it doesn't seem to matter to them. And so if the deal isn't significantly different, I'm not optimistic that it's going to get passed. And Rob brings up another excellent point is, does that shift the blame then to the teachers? And that's something they're going to need to consider as well.
Well, and around that finger pointing point, Rob, we should point out the ATA has indicated it's presenting the offer neutrally and not lobbying for its members to vote one way or the other. But at the end of the day, how much pressure do you expect there to be on teachers to ratify?
Well, that's the thing, right? It's not just looking at what's on the piece of paper. I think it's also about how's this going to play with the general public? How's this going to be received if we reject this? So, I think they got to factor all of that in. But, just kind of from what I've been seeing and hearing, is not a lot of enthusiasm for this deal. So I think it puts teachers in a tough spot at the moment here. And again, I don't know where this all goes. And if this is rejected, it would seem like a strike is all but certain at that point, and perhaps even a prolonged strike. So I think that's a real worry here. So, it's a tough spot for teachers to be in. And maybe just at the end of the day, the idea of putting all of this to rest and not having to worry about the fallout from a strike might be enough to carry this deal over the finish line. But I wouldn't hazard a guess at this point.
And Marg, are you surprised that the ATA would present this to its members in a neutral fashion and not one way or the other?
I don't know if I'm surprised, but I think they are factoring in all the things that Rob has mentioned, that it's a tough position for everybody to be in. And I think it's important to remember the teachers aren't just doing this for themselves. They are doing it for their students, and they do care deeply about students. I've never worked with a teacher who didn't. And so it's a big decision for them because they will be factoring in what's it's going to do to the kids, and the disruptions. So to me, it's unprecedented. I've never seen it like this before.
And Rob, last 30 seconds to you, what kind of pressure will there be on the government here? Or can it just step back and watch everything unfold?
Well, right now, the government can take a step back and they can say, look, we presented an offer to teachers and let's see if they accept it. But I think moving forward, there's still a lot of political pressure here, not just in terms of adequately compensating teachers, but making sure we have more teachers, making sure we have more schools, because in a lot of ways, right, the system has been bursting at the seams, and this deal is not necessarily going to fix those challenges.
All right. We have to leave it there for time. Great to see you both. Thank you kindly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.